Welcome to Peter and Ruffy's Football Show. 30 years ago this very day, Scottish football lost one of its greatest managers while he was in control of the Scotland international side in a World Cup qualifier against Wales. Tonight on Peter and Ruffy's Football Show, it's a tribute to Jock Stein. And it doesn't get any better than three men who knew him very well. Our boot-room guest tonight, Alan Ruff, as you would expect, takes his place alongside one of the finest broadcasters of Scottish football in Archie Macpherson, and a Lisbon Lion, no less. Jim Craig is our third and final guest. Delighted you guys could join us here tonight to talk about Jock. I suppose the first question is, what is your abiding memory of the great man?
His organisation abilities, because he came in, Peter, to Celtic in 1965. The last trophy had been the League Cup final of 57, when Rangers were beaten 7-1. There was great euphoria at that time, but after that, that team broke up. Like Charlie Tully and Betty Peacock left. Bertie Auld went to Birmingham City. Pat Creran was transferred to Man United. And the club was in a really, really rough spell. Nothing much was happening. And he came in, and within 2 years, of course, he revolutionised everything. And it's just sheer presence that you remember more than anything else.
The thing that's lucky for me, Archie, is knowing you as I do. You know, it's one of those things where a journalist would swap places with you because you were born and were able to work in an era where the footballers that we had at our disposal were unbelievable. But to actually be there and know and scratch the surface of a manager like Stein?
Well, at the time you didn't know you were in a golden age, but by comparison with what we have now, and I'm not being stupidly disparaging of football at the moment, but nevertheless, if you had to make comparisons and look at your history properly, it was a golden age. And he'll long be associated with that golden age, relatively speaking. I mean, at the time, people like Ernie Walker would say, would be looking back maybe 10 years. He said, you would say it was a golden age. We never won anything. Well, the international team didn't win anything, but Jim won something, and Rangers won something in Barcelona, and we had Gothenburg. And in that period, Stein, who was the trailblazer. I mean, somebody said to me today, was he the best manager ever? I said, well, you've got to take into account that a man went south to Manchester and did remarkable things. Very successful in a different kind of environment and so on. But if you consider that Stein set the template, he was a trailblazer, and Sir Alex copied him. He picked him up, picked up his habits, picked up the way he dealt with players, with the media, is almost identically. What he did, Peter, was this. When Jock was there, Jock fermented within the media their bias. Alec did the same up at Aberdeen about the West of Scotland press against Aberdeen. In that sense, being the trailblazer, I put him numero uno.
Ruffy, the great thing about Archie is, we'll find out later in the programme, he had some great ding-dong battles with him. We'll find out some horror stories of players trying to pull the wool over Jock's eyes. But from your point of view, at international level, you regarded him as a man way ahead of his time.
Yeah, there's no doubt about that. I mean, Jim had the privilege of working with him day to day. You know, I was coming from club to international, which was maybe one international a month at that time. And it just, when you were in his presence, there was an aura there, wasn't there, Jim?
Very much so, yeah.
And respect as well. And it didn't matter what he said, you know, it was gospel, and you took everything in. As Jim's already touched on, his team talks were legendary. You would come out of team talks and you would know exactly what you were doing. And he was the kind of guy that he upped your game. I don't know if Jim would, you know what I'm talking about. He made you a better player, you know. He gave you somewhere to reach, you know, and you couldn't fall short of that. And that's what was good for me, you know, coming from a small club like Partick Thistle. You upped your game and you became a better player. I
wonder if you two guys can give me a little insight into this. Archie, obviously you've written 2 books about the great man, and having, you know, spent that time with him, Jim, and getting the education that you did from him as a manager. How much do you think, you know, the forming of Jock Stein as a manager was set with the 3 years that he had coaching the reserves, so he kind of had an insight into them? you know, he did go out and watch the great Hungarian side in 1954. He was able to actually see other people, the way they played, and he was able then to translate the good bits of them to you guys.
Yes, but I think you've got to go back to his playing career. First of all, I mean, it was a really unusual career because he had a few years at Albion Rovers, then he went down to Llanelli. And when he came up, ostensibly to be the linchpin in the reserve team, Celtic's 3 normal centre-halves were all injured. And he got his place in the first team and kept it for the next 4 years before the injury kept in. So he had a playing career behind him, first of all. And then the work with the reserves, where they all thought he was terrific. At the same time, as I've mentioned, the first team at that time wasn't doing particularly well. And then he told me himself the big game that made a difference for him was Real Madrid versus Eintracht, the 1960 European Cup final. When he saw Real Madrid play, he told me he realised that with the exception of the centre-half, who he wanted to be thou shalt not pass, the attacks had to come from all the other players, because that made life very difficult for the opposition.
Well, you know, I think his managerial ability wasn't commensurate with his ability on the park as a player, and that was his strength. In my view, it was his strength, because if you're not as good as you would like to have been, you can maybe impart that to other players.
No, but what I mean is it's a good basis for learning.
Yeah.
The fact that you've played in that position, centre-half, and you know what's going on. And then you get an education, which he got, obviously, at other clubs. I mean, after Celtic, to go to Dunfermline, whom he took to, you know, semi-final place in Europe, in the Cup Winners' Cup.
And the sweeper.
Yeah, and then Hibs won the Summer Cup as well. He had a lot of success before he came to Celtic Park, you know.
Yeah, and with that in mind, did you sense, you know, and this is the thing, as Archie has mentioned about hindsight's a wonderful thing, but did you sense when he was back, when he slowly but surely started to implement his ideas? I mean, you know, I think Lord Jimmy Gordon said, what a season you've just had there, which is, you know, incredible. But did you sense at the start of it, you know, we could go through this entire season unbeaten or winning everything?
No, because it never works like that in football. I mean, you've got to get the basics right. And when he came in, he was very lucky to have players who could do what he wanted. He wanted 2 fullbacks who could come forward and attack. Now, I shall keep the gentleman's name to myself, but Tam Gemmell was told a year before Stein turned up that if he crossed the halfway line once more, he was not playing the next week, because defenders were defenders in those days, and this new idea of an attacking defender was relatively new. So he had 2 attacking defenders in Gemmell and myself. He had 2 midfield players in Murdoch and all. They had guys up McNeil and Clark, McLean and Clark in the middle of defence, and up front 2 blazing wingers in Johnson and Lennox, and in between that your combination of Joe McBride, Stevie Chalmers and Willie Wallace, you know. So everything was there for him, and it was just his way of getting the mechanics right and putting everybody in the right place and getting people to play with each other. And of course it had to be done, as your opening piece says, the right way. Football had to be entertaining and successful, right? And both of those are important.
Yeah. I mean, did you sense, Archie, then, you know, as you're watching this team develop, you know, through 66, 67 and the years where he really got to his peak and back to another European final, what was your relationship with him when you realised that you were literally following a team that were, you know, trailblazing across Europe?
Sure. Well, first of all, I didn't anticipate they would go on and win the European Cup final. I think few people outside of the Celtic camp themselves, when they got to the semi-final, thought that they would. But he had this, I dismissed the word charismatic about him. He was a much more stronger personality than that. It was almost as if his whole life was a belief in aggressive step forward, never resting. And I remember when you mentioned him going abroad to find out about other things, he went with a deputation of Scottish managers to Milan to see Helene Herrera. I remember him telling me years later that it wasn't so much the tactics that he picked up from them. I think Jock was wise enough to know what was going on in a modern game, what was effective and what wasn't effective. He says it was discipline. I realised the rigid iron discipline of Italian football, where players were treated very much in exclusion like monks.
Yeah.
And he felt that himself. Now, I'm not sure, Jim will tell you more about how he ran his team all the way through. I wasn't privy to that. But that's what he said to me. There had to be a basis of one, fitness, and secondly, discipline, breeding self-discipline. And that's what he got from Italy, from Helenio Herrera, before he went out and beat him.
Listen, the great thing about the programme, it could be a 4.5-hour show by the time we finish with these guys, but we'll be back after the break with even more from Archie Macpherson, Jim Craig and Alan Ruff, reflecting on the late great Jock Stein.